On today's episode of the podcast, you guys are getting a running masterclass from a 2:39 marathoner. Jason Fitzgerald is the head coach and founder of Strength Running, host of the Strength Running podcast, columnist for Trail Runner magazine, and a 2:39 marathoner himself. Strength Running has grown into the number 2 most popular running podcast in the US of all time, with millions of downloads and recommendations from Podium Runner, Runner's World, and other industry leaders. In this masterclass, you're going to walk away knowing the strength training benefits for runners, understanding running economy and why it's important, 4 strength exercises all runners should be doing, how often you should race over the period of a year, using proper fueling to enhance performance and facilitate recovery, keys to running a faster marathon and breaking through plateaus, calculating effort and race paces for workouts to crush your goals. For more Jason's content, check the links in the description below. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It takes 2 seconds, goes a long way, helps the channel grow so we can reach, inspire, and impact more people and ultimately make this world a better place. Love you guys. Now enjoy this episode with Jason. Why are you so passionate about strength training for runners?
You phrased that question in a really interesting way because I am not actually passionate about strength training. I am passionate about strength training for runners because I'm just a pure runner. I am a runner. I love it. I've been running since I was a freshman in high school. I fell in love with the sport super early and it imprinted on me. It is something that I grew up with. It's definitely a part of me. And I would say the only real reason that I love strength training is because it enables me to do the thing that I love, which is running. It makes my running better. So all the amazing benefits that you get from strength training, if you're doing it right as a runner, you're going to improve your running economy. You're going to be a more powerful, faster runner. You're going to reduce your injury risk. I mean, there's so many things to love about it. And that's why I love strength training. It just helps me do more running. It helps me feel better when I'm out there running. And it certainly helps improve your performances. So yeah, I mean, I like it for like the benefits that it gets me, but it's very unlike running. Whereas I like to go running because I like to run. But you're never going to find me in the gym just eating up every set on the bench or, every deadlift. I don't really care. I'm okay being a skinny runner.
Gotcha. So that term that you mentioned there, running economy, I think tends to get thrown around a lot in the running community, and I hear that a lot. I'm still not sure I fully understand what it is. So can you elaborate on what running economy is and why it's important?
Yeah, so running economy is the fancy way of saying your efficiency as a runner. It's a little bit more of a exercise science physiology term. It technically means, the amount of oxygen it requires you to run at a certain effort. So, if it takes you, X amount of energy to run, say, a 7-minute mile, and you improve your running economy, it's now going to take you less energy to run that same 7-minute mile. And running economy is definitely something that every runner I think would stand to benefit from because that's just going to make them better runners. If you take runners who are essentially the same fitness level, but one of them has much better running economy, they're going to finish the race faster because their maximum effort, while it's literally practically the same as the other runner, they're doing it more efficiently. So they're going to cross the finish line first. So it pretty much uh, relates to how well you move. So if you move really well as a runner, you're not going to have a lot of wasted movement. You're not going to waste, your the precious oxygen that you're breathing in. And when you're racing, when you're really using the maximum amount of oxygen that you can potentially use, especially in those middle distance races, 10K and shorter, that are a little bit more VO2 max oriented, unlike the marathon, for example. um, you need to be as economical as possible because if you're running at a VO2 max effort, or let's say you're racing a mile, you're running even faster than a VO2 max effort, you're sort of running on borrowed time. Eventually you will have to slow down because it's an unsustainable effort. And so our goal as runners and coaches is let's make runners as economical as they could be so that there isn't all this wasted energy, this wasted movement, which then subtracts from their overall performance. So yeah, it's just kind of a fancy way of saying like, how efficient are you when you go running?
So it sounds like it's kind of a mixture of like your VO2 max mixed with like your biomechanics of running, mixed with your aerobic capacity. Does that kind of sound like it's on the right track there?
Yeah, sort of. Like you can calculate your running economy sort of by measuring your VO2 max. That's like part of the equation of how you would figure out, like what your running economy is. And I'm not actually even sure if you can put a number on that. Like you can put a number on your VO2 max. You can go take one of those treadmill tests, get that mask on where you look like Bane, and they'll basically run you on the treadmill until you practically fall off. And using that data, like how much oxygen you're breathing in and exhaling, and how fast you're running, and how long you can do it, you can get a VO2 max reading. Running economy, as far as I understand, there's no number that goes along with it. It's more that you just want to be doing all the things in training that help improve your running economy. Everything from, doing your long run, running relatively high mileage, whatever that means for you, lifting heavy weights. That's actually quite good for your running economy in terms of your coordination and athleticism, improving your running form. So there's less of that wasted movement.
Gotcha. And so you mentioned, which is kind of hilarious, that you have a brand called Strength Running. You're a big proponent of strength training for runners, but you don't really like strength training that much. So was there I mean, there had to be a time in your life, or there had to be something that came up where you realized that this was really important and this is something that all runners need to incorporate. So, what was that moment or time in life for you that you really became super passionate about? Not even passionate about it, but like really know that that's something that you need to put into your routine as a runner.
Yeah, I had this aha moment at one point in my running career, and it was when I was injured for about 6 months after I ran the New York City Marathon. And I ran the marathon in 2008. It was my first marathon. Um, I had high hopes. I was coming off of being a collegiate runner. I was a little bit high on my own supply, feeling good about myself. And, I was telling a friend of mine who I think at the time had run 225 or 227 in the marathon. So he was pretty talented. And I was telling him that I was going to negative split the race, that, a 6 minute mile is just so easy. I can run that all day. I'm going to be running through Central Park and I want to close the marathon with a 5:30 mile. Very, very self confident in what I was going to do. And it didn't work out like that at all. It was a cliche experience of hitting the wall at mile 20, having that very inevitable slowdown. I don't think I fueled properly. I probably could have standed to benefit from boosting my running economy with some weightlifting, which I hadn't been doing at the time. But really, what happened was after the race, after I finished, my body just felt so beat up. I felt like I had been run over by a truck. It was so different than any other experience that I had ever had. And I would run sometimes 3 races in a week when I was in high school, or you'd get to college and you'd run like a 3K 800 double, or a 1500 meter 4x800 double, or a 4x400. So I had all this experience racing, and I had done a bunch of longer races, but the marathon is a special beast. And I came away from that race feeling so awful. And when I started to run again, I think it was about 10 or 12 days later, I only got through a couple runs, and all of a sudden my IT band started to hurt. And it was not something that resolved itself quickly. I spent 6 months just laying on the couch, watching reruns of House, feeling bad about myself, probably eating too many sleeves of Oreos. And I realized that like something had to change. So I saw a lot of physical therapists. I started doing just a ton of research into, how you get healthy from injuries, how you prevent injuries. And I had this aha moment. I was like, I'm not really doing too much strength training at all. I'm running 85, 90 miles a week. I'm doing all these crazy workouts, but there is a huge aspect of my training that's just lacking. That's just not there at all. And I had always been a relatively injury prone runner for say the last, I would say the last like 6 years or so of my running career. Plantar fasciitis, Achilles tendinopathy, IT band syndrome. This wasn't my first bout with IT band syndrome. I had pulled all kinds of muscles and had SI joint problems. So I was a little bit of a mess. I had all kinds of injuries. But this one was different. This one really took me out for a long time. And after I'd gone to see all those physical therapists and really evaluated my training, I was like, something's got to change. So I started adding in, at first, just body weight exercises, but a fairly high volume of it and very intentional with it. It's not like I got home from a run and was like, all right, I'll do some air squats and some push ups and call it a day. Like I was doing very specific routines that were specific to the sport of running, that also were very specific to some of the problems that I had been having myself. So a lot of my problems stem from the hip in the glute area, and then that kind of thrown things off further down the chain. So when I started focusing on that kind of strength training, I started feeling a lot better. It helped me get back into running. It took about 6 months for me to kind of regain the fitness level that I had when I ran the New York City Marathon. So it was about a year later that I was finally back to my normal quote unquote form. And after that, I started feeling even better. I just started feeling more efficient, a little bit more economical. Like I was just running without any wasted movement. I felt better at higher speeds. And I think the most impactful consequence of me starting to implement a lot of this strength training was I didn't really get injured anymore. Even though I started running just as many miles as I had before, I was doing just as many hard workouts, running great races. I really only had one fairly minor injury for 6 or 7 years after the New York City Marathon in 2008. So I was able to be much more consistent. And that allowed me to, run more than 5 minutes faster in the next marathon that I ran. Finally achieved my goal of getting under 240 in the marathon. I ran 239. And the marathon wasn't as challenging for me as it once was. So my aha moment, the thing that really sort of lit the fire under me was knowing that I needed to change something because I wasn't able to run. And like I said, I just want to be able to do this thing that I really love doing every day. Strength training helped me do that. And at the time when I was much more competitive, I'm not really like training as hard as I can anymore. But when I was really competitive, that made the difference. I mean, that made the difference between me feeling brittle and like I was going to break running those high mileage weeks with all those workouts and me actually feeling strong and confident, like I actually felt powerful when I was out there training.
So were you currently coaching at that time when you discovered strength training and started implementing it?
No, I wasn't. So this was like 2009. And I initially launched the strengthrunning.com website in 2009. I bought the domain in 2007. So this is all sort of happening around the same time. But it was really through that process of getting healthy, getting my training back on track, figuring out what I wanted to do with this strength running domain name, which I bought just because it sounded cool. I don't want you to think there's some big, grand plan behind it or anything. Yeah, I know you were like, you have this brand, strength running, but you don't like strength training. I bought the domain because it sounded cool. Um, so this was about 2009, and I know I wanted to start working with runners. So I started this website, but I didn't really have anything on there that was updated. And so, you know, I thought if you build it, they will come. And nobody came to my website. So I decided I really need to start a blog, which was like the thing to do in 2010. Now it's probably an Instagram account. 2010, it was a blog. And I started writing, just publishing stuff, trying to be helpful to runners. I tried to just write articles that were longer, more detailed, and had a little bit of personality to it that I think would be helpful for distance runners. And it started getting traction. And I started coaching, I would say, in mid to late 2010. So it was about 2 years after I got injured at the New York City Marathon. And it was about this time that strength running started to take off. That's when I got my coaching certification and really just started like hoovering up as much information as I could about the sport. You can't see now in the video, but I've got like shelves and shelves of training books and different kinds of running and health and fitness books. I was just a sponge for a really long time. And I think that was really helpful in giving me this like great foundation upon which to understand the sport. And I kind of layered that on top of my high school and collegiate experience, the experience I've had with all the coaches I've had over those years. And so it was a rewarding experience to be able to take everything I learned, because I felt like I had something to share with runners that was a little bit different and help them avoid some of the mistakes that I made in my own running career.
What do you think are the 3 to 5 exercises that all runners should implement into their strength training routines?
So with the understanding that there is no perfect 3 to 5 exercises, I think you can't go wrong starting with a squat and a deadlift, pretty much because they are fundamental basic movements. They are compound multi-joint lifts. They are going to strengthen your body in ways that are going to be very beneficial for your running. And there's a many variations that you can do on these. There's many different types of squats, different types of deadlifts. So even if you just did these two exercises, you'd get 80% of the way there, I think. Now, if we were talking more about like body weight exercises, I think it's important to sort of differentiate between the weightlifting you do in a gym to get stronger, to build power, to really become a faster, more economical runner versus the strength training that you might do in a physical therapy office. The body weight exercises that are a little bit more therapeutic, they're a little bit more corrective. If you've ever hurt something and gone to a PT's office, a big part of the treatment is doing a variety of exercises to make those tissues stronger, both where you got injured and also the surrounding tissues, so that everything's working well together. Um, I love doing all that body weight stuff because I find it very therapeutic. It really helps with alignment, it helps with posture, it does help you get stronger. So, if I were to pick some body weight exercises, I might say, the bridge, which is sort of like a it's kind of like a plank, except you're in a supine position rather than a prone position, and your feet are on the ground and you're driving your heels into the ground with your hips coming up. And it's a great hip, hamstring, glute exercise. There's a lot of variations too that you can make it a little bit more challenging and make it a little bit easier. So you can really start where you're at. And next, I'll choose the side plank, which is an interesting one for runners. But I think working in multiple planes of motion is more important for distance runners because, our sport is pretty much one plane of motion, and we've got to work in all three planes of motion. And so a side plank is really great because it has you working in that sort of side to side frontal plane that we typically don't get too much experience with when we're just running. And it also is really great for strengthening your hip. So I love those 4 exercises, a little bit different for each one, but you can certainly build out a pretty good program with a pretty limited number of exercises.
I like that. I like that. I want to circle back to what you said earlier about just kind of talking about your journey and how strength training really allowed you to flourish, to thrive in your own running and get under running a sub 240, which is insanely fast. But I'm curious, have you thought about it being strength training in and of itself, or was it strength training kind of being the lead domino that led to other things that were also beneficial, such as, proper warm-ups, cool down, lifestyle, nutrition, post-run, pre-run, inter-run fueling? I'm curious to get your opinion on that.
Yeah, I'll definitely admit that certainly wasn't just strength training, which let me stay healthy and end up running substantially faster in the marathon. It was a big part of it, and I like the analogy of it being like the first domino to fall, because what strength training really does, and I kind of mentioned this earlier in a different way. I was saying, oh, strength training allows me to do the thing that I love, which is running. It also allows you to do more of that thing. So if you're someone who struggles to run more than XYZ number of miles per week, strength training might give you the quote unquote armor to be able to run that in more. So strength training really allowed me to train harder. I was able to have more high mileage weeks with better workouts within those weeks, and ultimately just be a more consistent runner overall because I wasn't getting hurt as frequently. So, if you zoomed out, instead of talking about weekly mileage, if you were to talk about quarterly mileage, which is such a long term way of thinking about your mileage, in that big picture way of thinking about things, I was running more than I was running previously. Even if my individual weeks weren't necessarily that much higher, I was still running more overall, and that was due to strength training. I wasn't getting the niggles. If I got 5 niggles a season, now I was getting 2. If I had one season ending or an injury that might be risky to a season every 2 to 3 seasons before, now I was barely getting any of them at all. So in the grand scheme of things, I was able to train more, and then that allowed me to have more consistent workouts, just really be able to do more training. But then there were also definitely other things that helped too. I think I got my fueling a little bit better in the 239 marathon that I ran. Coming from a cross country and track background, we didn't talk about fueling at all. The longest race that I ran in college was 8,000 meters. I was finished in that race in less than 27, 28 minutes. We didn't have to take in a gel. It was totally unnecessary. Even when we did long runs, I mean, being a college kid, you'd wake up hungover on a Sunday and you'd go bang out a 15, 16-mile long run, no problem. That's just what we did. And then you would go to the dining hall and, eat your 1,500 calories and have a good Sunday. But when you get a little bit older and you try to start doing, it's not a 15-mile run anymore. Now it's a 20-mile run, and you're going to be doing 6 miles of it at 6-minute mile pace because that's your goal marathon pace. You need to kind of take those workouts a lot more seriously, fuel for them, not just to enhance your performance during the run itself, but you're also getting a jump start on recovery, which is then going to help you not really need to take a day off after a run like that. It's like, no, you got an 11-mile run the next day. Like, you can't be completely beat up because like the train never stops. You're just on that training train, right? You're just going full steam ahead. So the fueling became really, really important as I really wanted to optimize those longer distance races. If I was a miler, 5K runner for my whole life, probably wouldn't really have to worry about it. But, for the longer stuff, it became a huge, huge piece of the puzzle. And when I look back on things, I probably would say strength training allowed for better training. Then I got my fueling better for, that 239 race. Those were probably 2 of the biggest factors in that big improvement. Plus, I just had a chip on my shoulder. I was like, my first marathon just was horrible. I got injured. Now I have this comeback. I wanted to prove something. And I really wanted that sub 240. So I think psychologically, I was just priming myself to go crazy on the course in a patient marathon kind of way.
So this was something that I struggled with a lot during my marathon preps, and that was I would do all my long runs on this. It was like a long straight. It was like a 13-mile straight shot, and then like 13 miles back. So like whatever, if I was running like 14, 16 miles a day, I'm doing 8 miles straight, and then I'm just turning around and I'm running like 8 miles back. I never I didn't have anywhere where I could do like a loop. So that made that long run, tempo work, fueling, hydration, a little bit difficult since I personally don't like to run with a lot of things on me. Like, I don't really like to carry a water bottle. I don't like to have a pouch or, a little backpack on. So for me, it was like, oh, I'm just gonna not I'm just gonna not do it. I'm gonna and I'm kind of screwing myself a little bit there. What are your kind of pieces of advice for planning ahead for these long runs where you're gonna have some tempo work built in or some marathon paces built in, and really making sure that you're just optimizing your performance in those runs?
Yeah. Oh, it's funny that you say that because I had a place where I did long runs that was exactly like that. It was the C&O Canal outside of Washington, D.C. And I think it went from Virginia all the way up to like Pennsylvania. It was like hundreds of miles long. And I think my best long run workout was 11 miles out, 11 miles back. And on the 11 miles back, I did 3 times 3 miles at marathon pace, goal marathon pace, and then a little bit faster than goal marathon pace. And it was separated by a mile in between. So that kind of worked out to be the final 11 miles. And I loved that venue for long runs. But you're right, it was a little boring and it definitely made things challenging because you couldn't leave anything on the course. So that's certainly one strategy. If you're doing loops, you can always leave gels or the equivalent or a bottle with some, doesn't have to be water, like some sort of electrolyte or fueling product in there. For most runners, they don't have to treat fueling as this like end all be all, you must get the fueling right on every single run kind of thing, especially if you're not running these kinds of crazy distances. Like once your long run gets to be over 2 hours, then you have to kind of start thinking about real fueling considerations. Like if you're doing an hour 45 long run, you could just take a gel halfway through or maybe an hour in, and you'd probably be just fine. And that's sufficient. I do think it's valuable when you're training for a marathon to actually start planning for your fueling approach that you're going to do during the race in your last couple long runs. So if you're planning on taking a gel, say every 30 minutes, or every 4, 5, 6 miles, whatever it might be, do that in your long run so that you can actually feel and experience what that is like, so there's no surprises on race day and you can just dial it in. You might realize that I can't do all this with caffeinated gels because I'm just running to the bathroom every 10 minutes. Like that's unsustainable. So, maybe I'll save 2 caffeinated gels for the last 2 that I'll take. So you can kind of make these nice fine tuning adjustments to your fueling approach. Um, and I'm also like you in that I don't like to bring anything with me when I go running. I am most happy in a pair of 1-inch split leg shorts, no shirt, bombing down a trail with nothing in my hands. I've got nothing on. It's amazing. I love it. So it's always been hard for me to carry a bunch of fuel with me. I have found that now that I'm living in Colorado and I get to go on these amazing trail runs here, sometimes I'm out there for a long time. And with the heat, if I'm doing that in Colorado in the summer, I do just have to take some fluids with me. It's just impossible. Your body will start failing if you don't. I've found the softer water bottles that you can actually just grip in your hand and it's just like a bladder work the best for me because it doesn't matter if it's full or empty. I could just hold it really, really easily. Just put kind of a little strap over your hand. So I think Hydro Flask makes a pretty good soft water flask. That's really good that folks can try. And then of course, just try to shove some gels into your shorts pockets or into the band. Usually you probably are going to need 2 to 4 gels or the equivalent of whatever you might be using on a long run, so it's usually not that hard to fit it somewhere. But if you are someone who doesn't mind running with something, you can wear a running vest, you can wear one of those like hip bands that go around your waist that have like a little pocket in there. I've never really messed with any of that stuff too much because I'm like you, just give me the short shorts and I'm good to go.
So it's been kind of difficult for me to navigate this portion of running. So I ran my first marathon. I ran Philly last year which was my first one, which I know is a personal favorite of yours. I believe that's your PR, right? It's
That's my
Philly.
PR on the Philly course. Yeah.
Heck yeah, Philly's a great marathon. And then I ran Coastal Delaware in April after taking like a week off. So I started prepping like a week after the Philly one. And then a month after that, I ran an ultra and I was just super, super beat up from just being in like prep all year, just taking maybe 2 down weeks out of the entire year. So I'm curious. I mean, I see people just running races all the time. They're trying to PR like every other month, it seems like. And I'm just wondering how sustainable that is. And when you work with some of your athletes, what do you typically recommend in terms of like how frequent they should be running a race or trying to hit a PR? And I know it depends based on if they're a 10K runner, or a half marathon runner, or a marathon runner, an ultra runner, whatever else it is. But would love to get your take on just, sustainability wise, what you typically recommend your athletes when periodizing a year.
Yeah, I love this question. I think this is really important because if you don't get this right, you're just going to get burned out. You're going to get injured. You're not going to be able to continue on. It's not going to be sustainable. So I like to see runners race frequently, but very strategically. And it does depend on the type of race that you're going after. The shorter the race, the more frequently you can run it because it doesn't beat your body up the same way. If you run a 100-mile race this weekend and it doesn't go well, you can't just register for a 100-miler the following weekend and expect yourself to do well. Your body is not going to be ready for that. But if you race a 5K and it doesn't go well, me as your coach, I don't care. Who cares? Let's just register for another one and you can give it a go and we'll fix any mistakes or problems or, pacing issues or whatever it might be for this next one. And it's almost like the learning curve of racing and learning how to pace yourself and all like the small minutia of racing that I think is really important. Let's not forget that racing is a skill. We have to do it regularly. You can fine tune those things much more quickly if you're just targeting those middle distance races. So if you're targeting middle distance races, I mean, you can race 6, 7, 8, 9 times in a season, provided that they're short enough and it's structured the right way. I mean, you could run 6 races in a season spread out over 2 months. Or if let's say you want to run a half marathon, you might have your half marathon goal race, but then you might have 2 tune-up races leading up to that half. I think the most important thing is to know that all of your training always has to be cyclical, right? So all training basically goes from not training, from easy, not even easy, just rest. You are not running at all. Then you've got some easy training. You might call that base training. That transitions into the competitive phase of your training cycle. This is what people think of when they think of training. This is when you're running hard workouts. This is when you might start running your tune-up races. And then after the competitive phase of the season, you enter the peaking phase of the season. This is when you start to taper, you're getting ready for your goal race, and then you do end up running your goal race. What do you do after your goal race? You start the cycle over again. You take time off. You have rest. After a 100-miler, you need more rest than after a 5K. After a really long, hard season, you need more rest than after a short, relatively easier season. So, of course, it depends a little bit, but as long as you're respecting that cyclical nature of training, I think you're going to do pretty well at making running sustainable for you. Now, let me add a little caveat to that. That's basically a season, right? You have maybe 4 weeks of base training, you've got 8 weeks of competition type of training, and then maybe 4 weeks where you're peaking and you're eventually start tapering, you run your goal race, right? But there should be maybe one season a year, maybe a shorter block, maybe it's only 6 to 8 weeks, where it's more traditional base training. I think the vacation from intensity is really important. So take that, if you look at the college or university running a year, if you look at the annual program, let's just start in the summer. You have a whole summer of cross-country base training. You're barely doing any workouts. The only goal is to run a lot. Let's build your long run. Let's build your mileage. I just had my college cross-country coach on my podcast, and he was being a little diplomatic, and he didn't, he wasn't the hard ass that he was when I was in college. But his big thing was we need to run as much as we safely can, because that's going to make us as strong as we can be from like an aerobic perspective come cross country season. And so that vacation from intensity, just focusing on volume is really helpful at sort of just giving you a lot of low intensity running, improving your capacity for harder training to come in the future. And then you can get into those more formal seasons where you're cycling through everything. But having that little bit of a break, whether it's in the summer, whether it's in the winter, it doesn't really matter when it is. As long as you're incorporating that at some point, then I think your running is going to be a lot more sustainable. And then the last thing I'll say is I really don't like it when runners just go from marathon to marathon to marathon. Maybe this is my bias as a former track athlete, but when you look at the best marathoners in the world, they were middle distance runners first. And I think this demonstrates the appropriate development of a runner. No matter who you are, I think if you were to get competent and try to race fast in middle distance, shorter races first, before you went and did marathons and ultras and all this stuff, because those shorter races are going to improve your running in a lot of different ways that the longer races just don't. You are going to get faster. You're going to build more power. You are going to get stronger. Those workouts provide a fair amount of strength. You're going to improve your running economy and your VO2 max a lot better than if you were just doing marathon training. And when you can get fast in those other races, like we were talking about before, and how many races you can do, how many marathons can you do in a year? Probably 2 or 3 max. When it comes to the mile or the 2 mile or the 5K, I've run multiple races like that in a single week and been totally fine. And you can do that with the shorter races, and you're increasing the rate of learning and the rate of improvement. And improvement's improvement. Running is running, fitness is fitness. If you're getting better in a 5K, that means the next time you go and train for a marathon, you're probably going to run a better marathon time too. I mean, just think about it. If you go and run a 21-minute 5K, and then you work your butt off for 6 months and you get down to 18 minutes, you're a whole different runner. That's substantial. Now you can run 5K about a minute faster per mile. That's huge. When you go train for a marathon, your marathon time is going to be a lot better. You're just a much more capable runner. And you did it in a way that's almost a little bit easier. You didn't just flounder from marathon to marathon. You're working on some of these skills and you're actually improving so that your marathon time's better. So I've definitely gone on a huge tangent here, but I love being on the soapbox of telling people not to run marathon after marathon after marathon.
Yeah, no, that is really, really interesting advice that I don't think is talked about a lot, because the marathon is so glamorous, right? Like everybody wants to say, the 26.2, and you get the sticker on the car and you get the medal and you get the banner, and it's the sexy thing, right? The marathon is a sexy thing, but I think a lot of people underestimate how much damage that can really put on your body. And for me, like, I mean, I just jumped straight into it. I jumped straight into the marathons. I've done 2 marathons and an ultra. I've never ran a 5K, never ran a 10K, never ran a half marathon. Like, I tested my mile, and you and I both know that didn't turn out very well post mile recently, but we'll give that one another crack. But I'm curious, do you have a specific use case, or not use case, but a specific case with one of your clients where you're particularly proud of, like, hey, we were going for like a long marathon goal, or like a longer race goal, and you kind of brought them back to earth and was like, hey, let's improve the running economy, let's get better at these short distance, these mid distance, and then they came back and maybe they did set a PR in the marathon.
Yeah, I have quite a few. I mean, I would say most of my clients are probably in the half marathon to marathon category of these are the races I would like to focus on. But I will very much encourage them to take a season away from the marathon, focus on other races. And typically, what happens is if you are able to have a good season and run a PR in those other events, then you're in a better position to PR in the marathon. Now, the problem with running just a marathon after marathon after marathon is like, where's the improvement? You're only looking for it in one race. So, yeah, I mean, I've had runners who, they come to me, they're like, I've run 6 marathons in the last 2.5 years. I'm not getting any better. Can you coach me? So I'm like, yep, let's do it. So we start working together, and they're like, all right, I'm thinking about my race schedule. And I'm like, hold on a sec. We're not going to run a marathon for 6 months. Instead, we are going to focus on the 5K. And they're like, but I can wake up tomorrow hungover and run a 5K. Like, why would I spend 3 months training for one? I'm like, no, you don't understand. The goal isn't to finish it. That's what you think of when you think maybe marathon or ultra marathon. It's like, oh man, I would love to get that 26.2 sticker on the back of the car, right? But with the 5K, the goal isn't to finish it. The goal is to run it really fast, faster than you have ever done it before. And when you take a break from the marathon and you train for these shorter races, the thing that really forces you to improve are all the workouts that you never would have done if you were training for a marathon. Because with marathon training, I mean, look, you can get 80% of the way there just by not doing any workouts and just by running high volume with some really good long runs. That'll get you to a pretty decent marathon time. Because the marathon is, over 99% aerobic. You never really are stressing the systems that you have to stress when you train for a 5K. But nevertheless, if those 5K oriented systems like your VO2 max, like your running economy, like your muscular strength and power are so elevated, then that makes a faster marathon time just easier for your physical capabilities. So it's less of an issue of training specifically to get better at the marathon than training you to be a better runner, then letting you loose on the marathon.
Gotcha. That's great advice. I'm going to ask a little bit of a selfish question here because I'm a bigger guy. I played football in college. I was never a runner, never thought I would find myself in this space. But I ran my first, I usually, I'm about 6 foot and I typically sit around 185 to 190. Up, get it up into like the low 190s in terms of weight. So definitely a bigger runner. And I see a lot more people like myself out there too. A lot of bigger guys, bigger people out there trying to run fast. But then I also see a lot of things like you got to be skinny to be able to run fast. So I'm curious if you think that skinnier, lighter also correlates to faster, or if people at a who sit at a higher weight naturally would are still able to run fast.
I think both. I mean, it's certainly the case that if you're carrying 30 extra pounds that you don't need to be carrying, you're going to slow yourself down. It's certainly the case that if you look at the starting line of any major marathon, you look at all those pro runners, the sport self selects for skinnier people. They're definitely at the top and at the front of those races. However, you can go and take this in the wrong direction and then say skinnier is better. The lighter I am, the better I'm going to be. And that's when you start running into problems. You're going to underfuel. You're going to put yourself at a much higher risk of serious injuries, including bone injuries. That's where now we're getting into the area of disordered eating. And, as someone who was on a cross country and track team for 8 years, it is present in the sport and it is everywhere. I don't think anybody who has participated in the sport on a team and had a girls team or a women's team around them all the time where it is a little bit more prevalent. I don't think there's anybody who would say, oh, there was no disordered eating on my team, because it is an unfortunate reality in the endurance running space. Now, with that said, just because, yes, if you are lighter, you're probably going to run faster, only up to a certain point. It's sort of like when I say high mileage is a good thing. I'm not telling you to run 300 miles in a week. Like, there is a point of diminishing returns, right? So let's try to use a little common sense, because a lot of people just take that to the nth degree and just go crazy. Now, Dominic, I've had teammates that were substantially better than me that were 6 feet tall, 160 pounds. So a little bit lighter than you, but these are guys running 100 miles a week. Uh, their natural body size is probably closer to yours, but through the training, they were just pretty thin. So I don't want you to self-limit your capabilities just because you're a bigger guy. What I would say is, because of your football background, I'm going to assume you probably were into more speed and power and strength oriented type of exercise before you got into running. you're most limited by your aerobic capacity. And so the best thing you can do for yourself is just a lot of easy running. It's almost like you're sort of resetting your metabolism. A lot of folks who come from those power oriented sports have what's called aerobic deficiency syndrome, where, they could probably run a 400 really fast, but you get them to run 5K really easy and they like almost can't do it. Their heart rate's really high all the time. Their body just has very little experience with low effort, under 70% of max heart rate type of training. And they don't know what to do with that. Their body is just sort of rebelling against it. And so the solution is just a lot of, you know, zone two, maybe high zone one work where you're just gradually building that foundation of aerobic capacity. Because you're probably already strong. You probably already know how to sprint. You have a lot of the skills that many distance runners want. Many distance runners have a lot of endurance, but they have no strength. They have no power. They have no, ability to bench press or anything like that. And if you can just build up your endurance a little bit more, it's going to come in handy. You're going to really see some breakthroughs for sure.
All right. Well, you just give me some hope there. So I appreciate that. So, another thing I was curious about is when you are training for, maybe it's a marathon, maybe it's a half marathon. We'll just go with the marathon right now. But you have these workouts where maybe it's tempo run or some sort of repeats, whatever, at, it'll say half marathon pace or 10K pace or 5K pace. And for me, when I would look at those workouts, I'd be like, well, I've never ran any of those. So I don't really know what my pace effort would be or should be there. So for anybody who's wondering and they see that maybe like 5K pace, 10K pace, 10K effort, half marathon effort, whatever it is, how do you calculate that if you've never ran those races?
Yeah, so that can be a little bit tricky, but it can be done. You can certainly make an estimate, your best guess on where those paces should fall. Um, I do think it's helpful just to go out there and maybe race a 5K once or twice, maybe three times, just to get a baseline idea of what you might be able to do in the distance, because that then helps set a lot of your other paces. Like if you just have a marathon time, that's a little bit difficult to then figure out your paces just from a marathon time, because a marathon is like, it's so long that it's rarely a max effort performance for an individual because they have fueling problems, they have to stop and walk. So it's very much a sub maximal performance. You train like your entire life to be able to have a max performance at a marathon where you don't have to stop, you feel good, you don't hit the wall, you actually maintain your pace at the end. It's like, it's like trying to catch a ferry. It's so hard, right? And it's like catching lightning in a bottle. And my college coach recently told me that you might have 5 races in your entire life where everything lines up perfectly. And you look back on it and you're like, it was the perfect race. I was in it psychologically, I was mentally there, I was able to, perform well, I executed, I felt good. And it's just like, everything falls into place. That's kind of rare. So without some race history, it is a little bit hard to set these paces. But uh, essentially, what you kind of want to do is almost just kind of level up each pace. So let's say your easy running pace. You know that you feel pretty comfortable running between 8:30 and 9 minutes a mile. Maybe about a minute or a minute and a half faster than that is your 1 hour race pace, which is about your lactate threshold. And then from there, you have a lot of data because a little bit faster than lactate threshold is probably your 10K pace. A little bit slower than lactate threshold is your half marathon pace. Now, if you're an elite runner who can run a half marathon in an hour, your half marathon pace and your tempo pace or lactate threshold are the same. Or if you're a slower 10K runner, your lactate threshold pace might be the same as your 10K pace if you're running a 10K in about an hour. So you can kind of see how these things are kind of related and similar. But if you know one of those things, either your 5K or your easy pace, you can sort of figure it out. But I mean, we could do an example right now if you had an actual like concrete race time and we could kind of figure it out on the fly.
Yeah, let's do it. And hold on,
Okay.
I'm gonna run to the bathroom real quick, and then we'll start to wrap this thing up. I apologize.
Oh, no, no problem. Do it.
Okay, let's just do as an example. I think this is a pretty popular time. A 3-hour marathon. Somebody who wants to run, for me particularly, that was I set out in my second marathon. That was my goal. So let's go with sub 3-hour marathon.
Okay, let's just say you are running a 3-hour marathon. That means your average mile pace is 6:52 for the marathon, right? Now we have to this is when the estimating comes in. And I will be totally upfront and say, if you have a more robust racing history, if you have a bunch of race performances, this is going to be a lot easier. So if we're just using one and it's a marathon, it is a little bit more difficult. And I do think the marathon is a more difficult race to do these calculations, but let's do it anyway. So a 3-hour marathon is 6:52 per mile. I'm going to assume that a 3-hour marathoner can probably run about 84 to 85 minutes in the half marathon. That's what I would call an equivalent performance. So if you can run about, let's just say 84:30. So 84:30 in a half marathon is an average pace. Let's see, it looks like it's just under 6:30 per mile. Yeah, it's 6:27 per mile. Now, your lactate threshold pace, by the way, this is getting really in the weeds. I hope all of your listeners haven't abandoned you so far, but we're
Yeah.
actually making this quite actionable. Okay. So then we've assumed your half marathon pace is 6:27 per mile. Now, we've got to figure out your lactate threshold, which is your 1-hour race pace. So if you're running 84:30 for the half marathon, your 1-hour race pace is probably going to be somewhere around 6:05 to 6:15. I'm going to guess somewhere in there, faster, but not substantially faster. So that's what I would call your lactate threshold. Your 10K pace is probably going to be 5:50 to 6 minutes a mile, a little bit faster. Your 5K pace is probably going to be a little faster than your 10K pace, obviously, maybe 5:30 to 5:40 per mile, somewhere in there. Um, so there we go. We figured out your 5K pace, your 10K pace, your half marathon, and your lactate threshold. They're all a little bit, you kind of go down this list of, okay, this one's going to be a little faster than this. This one's going to be a little faster than this. Usually there's less variation between your lactate threshold and your 10K pace, but there's a substantial variation between your lactate threshold and your 5K pace. Because as soon as you get into those faster paces, you can start going a lot faster than your 1-hour race pace.
And did you just plug those into some sort of calculator, or did you just magically pull them out of your head?
I used an Excel spreadsheet and did the math myself.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
I have done this probably 2,000 times in the last decade, if not 3,000. So I've gotten kind of good at it over the years.
So this next stage of your life, are you currently still competing? Are you still trying to set PRs, or what does your current training, your current season of life look like?
Dominic, before I answer that question, can I go back to pacing for 1 second?
For sure.
I just realized that this actually might be quite accurate for you because if you were training for a 3-hour marathon,
Yeah.
I, I said, okay, maybe you can run a 5K about 5:30 to 5:40 mile pace, or yeah, per mile. Then if I were to calculate your mile pace, I would probably put it around 5:15. I might say 5:10, 5:05 to 5:15, maybe 5:20. And that is pretty much right where you were. So that actually works out really well.
Yeah. Let's, hopefully, hopefully is a little bit different outcome if those paces are on target for the
Yes.
other ones. But that
Yes,
is
for
that is
sure.
that is pretty wild. Okay. Right on pace there. That's good to know at least.
Yeah, so it seems like the pacing is accurate. If you kind of take like 20 seconds or so as a range per pacing, then or per race distance. So if you go from 10K to 5K to mile, they all should be maybe about 20 seconds different from each other. if you're well trained and you're doing things the right way.
Sure.
Okay, so with that said, I am not training for PRs anymore because I did things. I went pretty hard on running from the time I was 14 years old to the time I was about 30 or maybe 31. I had a pretty good 17-year stretch of trying to be the best runner that I could be. And then, I had my second kid and then I had my third kid, and it just became a lot harder to run 90 miles a week. So I'm not training as hard as I potentially could be or trying to run the times that I ran when I was like 20, 21, 22, and drowning in testosterone like I used to be. I still wish I could get some of that testosterone back. But I'm still competing. I've done a couple 5K races earlier this year. I'm going to turn 40 this fall, and I was thinking about trying to run a sub 5 minute mile on my 40th birthday. Um, I might have some work to do. I think I might be in the 5:15 range myself these days. Um, if I give myself a couple weeks of training, but if I get my act together, I think I could run a sub 5 minute mile on my 40th birthday, which would be kind of cool.
Do you have a favorite failure from all your years of running?
Maybe my first marathon that we talked about, because that was the big impetus for me transforming my training, really doing things differently, adding in strength training. That sort of gave me a lot of confidence to start strength running at the time, because I felt like I really had some valuable things to share. And if I didn't have that, I'm not sure I would have changed my training. I'm not sure I would have gone after the marathon with such a vengeance afterward. And maybe I wouldn't have started strength training or strengthrunning.com. So that's probably the failure that I look at that, I almost like the best, my favorite failure, because so many good things came from it. And I probably could point to a whole host of injuries that I've had, especially in my college career, because they forced me to train around them and to get good at that. How do you stay in shape with cross training? Can you do that? When you come back from a period of time when you haven't been running, you haven't been doing workouts with the team, you've just been in the pool or on the bike and lifting weights and doing maybe a little bit of running. Do you have the confidence then to line up on a rate on the track wherever you might be and still go after a personal best? And I was in those situations so many times that, it's just part of the sport. And if you didn't have those moments of adversity, you wouldn't have the growth. You wouldn't have the all the learning that comes from failing and figuring things out after the failure. So I look at all those failures, from all my injuries to so many bad races that I've had in my career. I kind of think it was great that I ran track, because we ran one or two, maybe three races a week. If you had a bad race, you just had to wait 2 to 5 days and you would get another opportunity to do it. So I didn't put any races on a pedestal, really, like a lot of adult runners do when they discover the marathon. It's like this mythical race distance. They're going to run only marathons and they just put it up on a pedestal. I didn't put races on a pedestal because I was racing so frequently, everything from the 400 on up to 8K cross country. And because I failed so often, I've almost forgotten about most of the failures, because like they're just so inconsequential. I just have all the life lessons and the wisdom from failing a lot and once in a while having a good race.
That's great. What is one thing on your running bucket list that you have yet to check off?
Ultra marathon. I tried 2015, Dominic, a big fat DNF next to my name. I hurt my knee about halfway, a little further on than halfway in a 50K. And it was right when I had moved to Colorado and was just really into trail running and all that. But I probably shouldn't have signed up for a 50K ultra with like almost 8,000 feet of vertical. Probably a little bit too much for my first ultra, and I just don't think I was strong enough for that amount of elevation change. It was just crazy. So I had a little bit of a resurgence of that IT band syndrome that I mentioned. And so to this day, I've never completed an ultra, but I really think I would like to, because I've done so many other types of races. I've pretty much done every type of race that you can enter, from triathlon, duathlon, obstacle course race, um, trail races, cross country, indoor track, outdoor track. I even raced a 200-meter race once, which is hilarious. If you ever see a distance runner in a 200-meter, it's not good, Dominic. It's not good, but a lot of fun. I think I would just like to have a lot more like trail running adventures now that, I'm not going to probably touch the times that I ran when I was in my early 20s, but I would love to go do, some of these amazing trails in Colorado where, they're 20 miles long. You're going to have to hike part of it. It's a whole day adventure, but to have the fitness and the drive to be able to go do that and just be in some of the most beautiful environments in the country, I think is just priceless. And so I want to have more of those experiences.
No, that's amazing. And Jason, I just want to say thank you so much for all of the freaking gems that you dropped today. I really appreciate you just showing up and just being so giving and just providing so much value. So I appreciate it. The last question for you is, this is the Pure Ambition podcast. So when you hear those two words together, pure ambition, what does that mean to you and how does it apply to your daily life?
Ooh, I like that. Yeah, pure ambition to me is almost just like you're ambitious in a pure sense. You're not doing it for the wrong reasons. You actually want to succeed in whatever endeavor it might be for the right reasons. And so whether you're a runner and you just want to be able to see what you can do, you want to, discover the limits of your potential. I think that's a pure ambition. If you're, an entrepreneur and you want to reach a lot of people and help as many people as you can with, a great business that you're starting, I think that's pure ambition too. So for me, I mean, now that I'm not training to run my personal best times anymore, I've discovered that I get just as much fulfillment and joy out of seeing my athletes achieve. And I just love helping runners reach their running goals, whatever it might be, and I just get such a shot of adrenaline from hearing from a runner who's like, I finally had a season where I didn't get injured. Thank you so much. Or I finally broke 3 in the marathon. This has been a 4-year goal of mine. Whatever it might be, whatever goal it is. Like, I had all kinds of weird and wacky running goals. And so I'm not one to judge whatever your goal might be. But if you accomplish it, that's something special. It represents a lot of hard work. And so in my daily life, I try to be as helpful as I can for runners to help them do whatever it is that they want to do. That's sort of my version of pure ambition in my daily life.
I love it, man. Last thing is, if people want to check out more of your content, they want to dive more into your coaching, check out your programs, your podcast, where are you hanging out?
Yeah, I think strengthrunning.com is the home base. That's where you can find all my different coaching programs and services. If you're interested in that, you can also check out the Strength Running podcast. The Strength Running YouTube channel is also a place where you can get more bite-sized pieces of advice in video form. And then I'm also on Instagram at JasonFitz1. I think we did an IG live maybe a month or 2 ago, which was really great. And I'm glad that we could do a longer form version of it today.
Absolutely. Jason, thank you, man. I appreciate it. Looking forward to continuing to learn from you.
Thanks, man. This was great. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys so much for tuning into today's episode. I wanted to give you all a heads up too that I launched a free community on the Upspace app where you can join, ask me questions, connect with like-minded individuals, follow my 4-week running and strength training program that has some dedicated mobility sessions in there as well, so that we can all optimize our health and fitness together. So if you're interested, head over to the App Store, download the Upspace app, and join the Pure Ambition community today. Love you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.